Heavy is the head that wears the crown, but heavier is the burden of being next in line. The British royal family is built on the traditional duty until death. For every heir to the throne, there is a spare.
I think that probably the shock of the mother's very sudden death and him becoming king, when these things happen, you go into slight shock, so you act quite mechanically. It sort of protects you in a way. So I think he wouldn't have been overwhelmed at that moment. He would have been very emotional, but he would have kept it all in check. So I think he dealt with it on a very professional level, which would be really the only way to deal with something of that enormity happening to you.
Charles knew he'd become king, following in his mother's footsteps, leaving his sister Anne behind. Despite their close childhood bond, becoming the reigning monarch would definitely divide the pair.
I too now solemnly pledge myself, throughout the remaining time God grants me, to uphold the constitutional principles at the heart of our nation.
When one steps up, the other must step back. Unlike his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, Charles always knew he would one day become king. Becoming heir apparent at just 3 years old, Charles has become the oldest and longest surviving heir apparent in British history, and the longest-serving Prince of Wales, having held the title since 1958. In his own way, he has defined the role of the heir apparent. He has been called a visionary in his creative and forward-thinking ideas, with his passions for the environment, architecture, and alternative medicine. Charles is president or patron to over 400 charities and organizations, and is known as one of the most hard-working royals, alongside his sister, Anne, Princess Royal. The Prince of Wales has had a life with challenges.
Well, he was a very studious child. I mean, he was somebody who was quite unlike Prince Philip, who was a much more boisterous character. He was unlike his mother as well. His mother was somebody who was very serious from a very young age, and Charles, I think, inherited this seriousness, but what he had, which she didn't have, was a real interest in learning and a real interest in books and things like that. This is seen as quite anomalous, because members of the royal family are not traditionally seen as intellectuals, but Charles, I think, was seen as somebody who had intellectual ideas and interests, possibly inculcated in him from his nannies at a very young age.
Well, Queen Elizabeth was a very dutiful mother, and if you think that she became queen aged 25, she had, Prince Charles was, I think, he was 4, nearly, and Princess Anne was she was born in 1950, so she was only just 3 when the Queen was crowned. So basically her children were taken away from her. She just didn't have time to be with them. So she would see them in the morning, for 15 minutes, and she would see them at night for half an hour. But again, you have to judge it by the mores of the time. That was how aristocratic families worked.
When the coronation took place in 1953, it was quite interesting because Charles was obviously just about old enough to be at the coronation and to have an understanding of what was going on in a way that none of his siblings who were currently born did. And I suspect that for a very young boy, it would have been an overwhelming experience. I mean, the pageantry, the noise, the sheer number of people. But there'd also have been, probably by then, in the back of his mind, this thought percolating about, it's going to be me one day, this is all going to happen for me.
It was a 3-hour ceremony. It was, everybody recalls, the coldest June day that had ever happened. And it was pouring with rain. And people, there was, if you go back, this is 1953. So the ceremony itself was very, very serious and very religious, and very dramatic.
And it's impossible to speculate exactly how he would have felt, because we have no record of his thoughts of the time, and I doubt very much he remembers exactly how it was. But certainly, it must have been a sense of absolutely terrifying pressure being put on you as a young child to see all this at such a young age, and to think, one day, unless something horrible happens or unexpected, this will all be for me as well. Well, obviously he was the eldest sibling of 4. And I think it's fair to say that because he was the first sibling, and because he was going to be Prince of Wales and then eventually he was going to become king, there was always a sense that he was the one who was given the most attention and the most focus. So I think this is something that he, on the one hand, he thrived on, because who wouldn't thrive in a situation where you're always told that you're the most important one?
The young prince suffered from bullying at school and bouts of homesickness as he was sent to Gordonstown in Scotland, the alma mater of his father, Prince Philip. A school his father had hoped would make a man out of Charles and instill in him the qualities required in a young man who would one day be king.
Well, Charles was sent to public school in Scotland at Gordonstown, which is an infamously tough school where essentially the attitude is spare the rod and spoil the child. It made Charles embittered, it made him, I think, somebody quite closed in terms of his emotions, because he had to keep so much to himself.
And he actually thought that Gordonstown would be good for Charles because it was up in the north of Scotland, away from the press. It was, it was meant to be wonderful outdoor life, and great emphasis was placed upon the training of the mind as well as the training of the brain. And Philip thought it would be perfect. I think the Queen and the Queen Mother probably thought that he would be, being such a sensitive young man, he probably would have been better to go to Eton. Prince Philip wanted his son to be an image of himself. He wanted him to be macho, and he wanted him to be sporty, and he wanted him to have a sort of very strong personality. Well, Charles wasn't like that at all. He was very timid. He wasn't particularly sporty. He was a little awkward, and he wasn't really the son that Philip hoped he'd have. So as Charles grew, their relationship just didn't work.
It was quite common before Charles for monarchs to go up to Oxford or Cambridge. I mean, Edward VIII, when he was Prince of Wales, went to Magdalen College, Oxford, but most people went to university simply to acquire kind of a tick box, whereas Charles actually went to Cambridge with the intention of studying. He was the first member of the royal family to have actually gone to university with the intention of doing a 3-year course and having a degree. But he had a very good time at Cambridge, because I think after the privations of prep school and boarding school, he found people he was comfortable with, he found an academic environment that he enjoyed, and he managed to act a lot as well. So I think you can say that Cambridge was in many respects the making of Prince Charles, and then of course when he became King Charles, he's still been somebody who's had very strong links to his old university, and he got a 2-2 in history in the end, which actually for somebody who came from a non-academic background was quite an achievement.
I'm letting out a little slack now. Yes, taking up the strain. This is most exciting, ladies and gentlemen. I've never seen anything quite like it before. I think I got quite a large one here. It's very, very large indeed.
Challenges have also arisen from the media reporting, focused on the ups and downs of Charles's personal and romantic life. His days as the most eligible bachelor prince saw great speculation about his future wife. The eventual marriage to Lady Diana Spencer was just the fairy tale the world had been waiting for, a dashing prince with his blushing bride. Although Charles had been Prince of Wales for some years, it wasn't until the 1st of July 1969 that the Queen officially invested in him. Before the ceremony, Charles had left Cambridge University to spend a term at the University College of Wales at Aberystwyth. During his tenure in Wales, he spent his time learning about Welsh history and culture and learning to speak the language. Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, is one of the hardest working members of the British royal family. Known for her no-nonsense attitude, the princess has a very well-deserved reputation for hard work commitment to her work, and charitable causes. Her brother's role was predestined, but hers was not, and she has spent many decades finding that role and redefining the meaning in her work. Although Princess Anne plays a vital part in the most famous family in the world, her story is less often told in the media. She may be the most hard-working member of the British royal family, but she isn't necessarily the most well-known. In recent years, however, a wave of popularity for the princess has developed following the Netflix series The Crown airing. Erin Doherty, who plays the princess, revealed her enthusiastic and genuine appreciation and fascination for Princess Anne and her work.
Has it changed your perceptions of the royals, your perception of Princess Anne?
I mean, honestly, I didn't really know anything about her, so I kind of got the call and I was like, okay, cool. And then I kind of went away and was like, oh wow, she's a real deal. She's this kind of royal rock star. I love her. I think she's brilliant. I just think she's honest, and she just has no time for. She just doesn't want to waste any time like lying or pretending that she feels a certain way, especially when I think there's such a kind of politeness that you have to abide by within her family that I think when it comes to her personal life, she's so strictly the opposite because she has no time for it, which is brilliant. I just think she's great.
Princess Anne is the only daughter of the Queen and Prince Philip, born only a couple of years after her brother Prince Charles on the 15th of August 1950. As her two younger brothers, Princes Andrew and Edward, were born several years later, Charles and Anne shared a close bond growing up. At that time, the royal family's life was blessed, with summer and Christmas holidays spent in Balmoral and Sandringham, laying the foundations for Princess Anne's love of horseback riding. Many idyllic times were spent playing with her older brother and roaming free in the country estates. The princess had a secure and happy childhood. Princess Anne is said to have had an incredibly close emotional bond with her father, Prince Philip. He admired her for her challenging and resilient nature. Some reporters have even said Princess Anne was Philip's favourite son. They had a lot in common, similar in their pragmatic approach to life and their strength of character, whilst not being adverse to expressing a strong opinion. Charles and Anne shared a governess, Catherine Peebles, for their early education. Still, by 1963, Anne was keen to move on to the outside world, to a boarding school, and she was enrolled at Benenden School, a historic house in the beautiful Kent countryside, the Garden of England.
And what's your personal reaction to having the princess come here?
I think it is a very great honor for us, and I hope a great opportunity.
May I ask you finally about your own feelings on discipline? Suppose a girl does something that's against the rules, what happens to her?
It depends what the misdemeanor happens to be. We deal with such misdemeanors ad hoc. Usually a talking to in the right way is all that is necessary. Otherwise we deal with it according to what it is.
Have you ever expelled a girl?
Never so far.
The princess has been vocal about the benefits of a boarding school education, and whilst acknowledging that some students may not enjoy the experience, she felt it was the right thing for her. In June 1987, the Queen bestowed the title upon her daughter, Anne, the Princess Royal.
She said, you know, there's really only you and them, and it requires an awful lot of concentration. There are certain advantages in being lost in a class of...
Were you nervous? Were you nervous about going to public school?
No, I think I did actually rather quite look forward to it in many ways.
And how did they treat you? Was there any bullying done? I imagine there wasn't really, knowing you. Or at least being aware of you.
I wasn't that big a girl.
Although the title is honorary, it is the highest honor that may be given to a female member of the royal family. So it was a very significant moment for the Queen to publicly recognize the immense dedication Anne had been applying to her role as a working member of the royal family. Being a young, beautiful princess and daughter to the Queen made Princess Anne a very eligible young lady. As with her brother Prince Charles, there was great speculation as to whom she would marry, although the pressure was relatively low, as her children in all likelihood would not end up as the future king or queen. A shared interest in equestrian sports brought Anne together with her first husband, Captain Mark Phillips. The engagement was announced on the 29th of May, 1973. In a peek behind the curtain, the royal couple sat down for an interview.
Why have you kept a bay in the wedding service?
Well, for that reason, I think it's in the service. And perhaps because I'm rather an old-fashioned girl.
As the Dean said the other day, the Prince Anne says obey, and I have to say worship, so I think that pays the money takes a choice.
It was even, well, I suppose after badminton, but can't speak for him or me, really.
Mr. Phillips, let me throw that one at you.
Yes, it was after badminton that we decided, really.
Has it been a great strain keeping it secret and indeed keeping it away from people like ourselves?
Good.
I think it has, yes, it became rather a strain in the end.
You seem on the surface to be a very shy person. It's not every day one proposes to a princess. Did it require a lot of courage to propose?
I'm not sure. I mean, I think the fact that the girl in question is a princess makes any difference at all. I think if you get married to somebody, it's a very, very personal thing, and the two of you just feel it, and it's a completely natural.
I think you've got to be brave to propose to anybody, haven't you?
Yes. But I mean,
indeed, perhaps it becomes relatively more important. But I rather hope that, every time he spoke to me or took me out, that he didn't actually think of me as a princess.
Do you think you'll make a good housewife? Can you cook, for example?
Well, that's hardly up to me to say either.
Cook scrambled eggs, I think we can recommend those.
Yes, I've done a bit of cooking myself.
Would you like to cook Captain Phillips' breakfast before he goes off to work, for example?
I can manage that. It's easy. Especially when he's eventing, because he's not going to get more than a cup of coffee.
When you were a teenager, did you have any idea of the sort of girl that you would like to marry?
No, no, I didn't. I wasn't very clever with girls, I don't think, when I was a teenager. I definitely was a bit, not very good. Not very successful, should I say.
Well, if you had not met a man whom you wanted to marry, do you think you would have married out of a sense of duty?
No way.
I'm glad you said that.
No, I don't think no tones, no.
Princess Anne married Captain Mark Phillips on the 14th of November 1973 at Westminster Abbey. It is thought that the Queen offered Mark a royal title, but he turned it down, preferring to keep Captain as his title.
Mark Antony Peter, wilt thou have this woman to thy wedded wife, to live together after God's ordinance in the holy estate of matrimony? Wilt thou love her, comfort her, honor and keep her in sickness and in health, and forsaking all other, keep thee only unto her as long as ye both shall live? I will. Anne Elizabeth Alice Louise, wilt thou have this man to thy wedded husband, to live together after God's ordinance in the holy estate of matrimony? Wilt thou obey him and serve him, love, honor, and keep him in sickness and in health, and forsaking all other, keep thee only unto him, so long as ye both shall live?
I will.
I pronounce that they be man and wife together, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen.
As she was the first of the Queen's children to marry, it was indeed a very special day. Around 500 million viewers were estimated to have watched it on television. It also happened to be the 25th birthday of her brother Prince Charles.
Last coach on the last stage of its journey through the forecourt and right into the centre courtyard of the palace. This really is coming home for the moment. Buckingham Palace really must be home to them all. And it comes into that central courtyard. We're looking at it through the glass window of the grand entrance. That entrance which must be so familiar to many people who've attended the garden parties. 2 postilions first, now the coach itself, 4 grade. There's the red carpet leading up the flight of staircase into the marble hall. The show reins in carefully. Footman bow, open the doors, Captain Mark Phillips, and now, welcome home, Princess Anne.
The couple's first child, Peter Mark Phillips, was born on the 15th of November, 1977. And young Peter was the first grandchild for the Queen, so an extraordinary moment for Her Majesty and Prince Philip, as it was for Princess Anne and Captain Phillips.
With the temperature just above freezing, Princess Anne came out. But instead of stopping on the steps for a moment for the large crowd, as she had promised, she just had a few quick words with the hospital staff. Nurse Zora Achroff held Paddington Bear, a hospital mascot. 2-day-old Master Phillips was carried out by Sister Delphine Stevens, the midwife who was present at the birth. Well wrapped up against the cold, he was handed to the princess, who, ignoring normal advice, sat with her son in the front seat of the car.
Watch yourself now.
And off the couple went to Buckingham Palace for lunch. They'll be staying there until they move to their new home in Gloucestershire.
As Mark did not take a title when he married Princess Anne, it was also decided that their children would not receive any royal titles. Anne has said she wished they could have as normal a childhood as possible. Anne and Mark settled into family life with their newborn son, and for the next 4 years, they did their duty, but focused on family. Their second child, Zara Phillips, was born on the 15th of May, 1981. After the birth of Zara, trouble was slowly brewing in the marriage between Anne and Mark. They were reportedly rarely seen together. The initial spark had worn off, and both were thought to be engaged in extramarital affairs. Subsequently, reports and accusations emerged that Phillips had fathered a love child with a New Zealand art teacher, Heather Tonkin. The couple separated in 1989 and divorced in 1992. Princess Anne went on to marry Sir Timothy Lawrence, who happened to be a query to the Queen from 1986 to 1989. They remained contentedly married, sharing their passions and hobbies, but with a keen eye on their royal duties and responsibilities.
I think that the family generally thought with Charles that he shouldn't marry before he was 30, that he should date as many people as he could and see what came of that. And on the one hand, he wasn't necessarily the most outgoing of men. He wasn't necessarily somebody who was going to be a lady killer. But on the other hand, he was a Prince of Wales. There was no shortage of people who would have married him. Well, he met Lady Diana Spencer in 1977 because he'd actually been dating her elder sister Sarah for a while. And when he first met Diana, she was 16. And it was an unequal relationship because she was still a girl, but there was obviously a spark between them, a spark of interest. And of course, at this stage, Charles was still seeing Camilla Shand, who later became Camilla Parker Bowles. So I think it's fair to say that on the one hand, the relationship with Diana was not necessarily an obvious love match from the beginning, but on the other hand, there was very much an interest on both sides. And she was somebody, perhaps because of her youth, who was not fazed by responsibilities that she'd have to take on if she became Princess of Wales.
In February 1981, Charles and Diana announced their engagement and appeared in an interview that would go down in history. When the reporter asked if the couple were in love, Diana replied, "Of course." Charles added, "Whatever in love means," and there he planted the seed of doubt.
Difficult to find that sort of word, isn't it, really? Just delighted and happy. And I'm amazed that she's been brave enough to take me on. And I suppose in love.
Of course.
Whatever in love means.
Well, it obviously
put your own
means,
interpretation.
Obviously means two very happy people.
Yes.
Once again,
As you can see. Well, from us, congratulations.
Thank you
very much. Very kind.
Charles's whatever love means is, I think, an attempt on his part to try and say, that's a ridiculous question, why are you asking me that? I'm not interested in responding to it. However, it was the worst possible thing he could have said, because for decades afterwards, that has been taken to mean he doesn't love Diana, he's doing this because he feels he has to, he's been forced into it, he couldn't care less, she could be anyone. And I think that a lot of the public ill will towards Charles comes about because it was felt he wasn't in love with Diana, and that response, I think, has led to a lot of it.
As we now know, Charles and Diana's marriage was unsuccessful. Whilst they built a family unit together with sons William and Harry, the relationship between Charles and Diana was not destined to last. Charles later rekindled an old spark with former girlfriend Camilla Parker Bowles, much to the dismay and disapproval of royal courtiers. But they went on to marry, and the public accepted their partnership.
Well, Charles's marriage to Camilla in 2005 was a civil ceremony rather than a religious ceremony, and it was very much felt, I think, by everybody in the country that they'd finally managed to make each other happy. And I think that if they had been allowed to marry 25 years before, the world would have been a much better place for it. But I think that what had been done so cleverly was that Camilla had been seen during Diana's lifetime as a rather villainous figure, which she really isn't. She's a very charming, very lovely woman. And what happened was this sort of PR campaign, a year or so after Diana's death, that Camilla and Charles were seen together in public. She was very much acknowledged as his companion. And eventually, it was quite a long time. It was 8 years between Diana's death and their marriage. He could not be accused of rushing into it.
the Queen saw the change in Camilla, and she saw her dedication to duty, and she also saw her dedication to Charles, because she so helps him, and he wants her at his side, and she will be at his side. So she's almost in a Queen Mother type of role. You know, Queen Mother was there for her husband in his weaker moments, and I think Camilla will be there for Charles.
When it came to his own family, Diana was well known to be a very hands-on mother, but Charles was a supportive parent too. William and Harry have praised their father publicly, and he has clearly set a strong example of the importance of hard work and generosity to others. After Diana's death, Charles had to step up and take more responsibility for William and Harry. Though the young princes were growing up and becoming more independent, it was undoubtedly challenging for them both. As the Prince of Wales, Charles undertook official duties on behalf of the Queen. He sponsors the Prince's charities and is a patron, president, or member of over 400 other charities and organizations. Anne entered public life at 18 and continued serving as a working royal. Involved in upwards of 300 different charity organizations, Anne is considered the busiest royal family member. The hardest working royal is a title she often receives, battling it out with her brother Charles, who has always attended the most engagements.
I mean, people nowadays are much more questioning, I think, about where their money goes when they're giving to charities, which seems to me perfectly fair. And to some extent that through these visits and what they see on reports helps to show them exactly what's going on, so much the better. I mean, that would probably be its main advantage.
The monarch is the head of the armed forces, and it has always been a great tradition of the royal family that every member should engage in active service and lead by example, playing more than just a symbolic role. The Queen was the first female member of the royal family to serve full-time on active service as a member of the ATS during World War II.
Is being treated just like any other trainee. Now visited by her parents and sister Margaret Rose at a training station in southern England, she shows them she knows a fan belt from a spark plug all right and isn't afraid to get her hands dirty. Her father gave her an officer's commission early in March. Papa and Mama seem to approve, too. Daughter is the first woman member of the royal family to join the services full-time.
Prince Philip too was an active member of the Royal Navy during World War II. So for Charles, it was an essential next step for him as heir to the throne and future head of the armed forces. While studying at Cambridge University, Charles received flying lessons from the RAF. He went on to RAF Cranwell in Lincolnshire to train as a jet pilot, with his passing out parade in September 1971. Like his great-grandfathers, his grandfather and his father, he pursued a naval career, taking a 6-week course at the Royal Naval College in Dartmouth. Charles served on the guided missile destroyer HMS Norfolk, and then on 2 frigates, the HMS Minerva from 1972 to 1973 and the HMS Jupiter in 1974.
In steaming heat, Prince Charles's frigate, HMS Minerva, edged her way into Nassau Harbour. A few minutes before, he had formally ended his duties as one of the ship's navigation officers and taken on the role again of His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, with his personal standard broken from the mast. In the month that he's been with Minerva in the Caribbean, he several times visited the Bahamas Islands, but this was the first time he'd made an official visit. To get to Rawson's Place, where the welcome speeches would be made, the prince walked at speed through an aisle of shouting, yelling Bahamians, with security men running in front to clear a path for him. If it was all a bit confused, the prince showed no sign of being put out by it. The speeches were from a dais placed in front of the old Nassau landmark, the statue of the prince's great-great-great-grandmother, and were brief to the relief of those in full dress with the temperature in the 90s.
I'll be looking forward to
It will be 5 days of ceremonial engagements before Prince Charles rejoins Minerva next Wednesday for 2 more months of Caribbean patrol as a naval lieutenant.
One of Princess Anne's great passions, just like her mother, is horses. But the ambitious princess furthered her passion, taking on an equestrian career alongside her royal duties. Influenced by her father, who excelled at polo and had a keen appetite for competition, it was in the royal blood to succeed at equine sports.
At a farm near Windsor today, as with almost every other day since she came back from the Far East, Princess Anne has been riding with doublet, preparing for the badminton horse trials in April, and in the long term, if that goes well, selection for the Munich Olympics in the summer. The princess is a specialist in the tough 3-day event that takes in a dressage with its 30 carefully prepared movements, 18 miles of cross-country riding, and on the last day, arena show jumping. After a layoff through the royal tour in Thailand and Malaysia, the princess is working back to fitness and accepting no more official engagements other than those already agreed to.
The young princess began competing at 11 years old, winning a jumping event held at Windsor Park. She continued to ride during her school years at Benetton. Her fearless approach to riding and the wild side of her character saw her succeed and take several falls, leaving her with more broken bones than most people see in a lifetime.
In the business, Princess Anne has a reputation of being a good competitor with a lot of endurance and a dislike of not winning. Mrs. Oliver feels that she's managed to help boost her confidence. For Princess Anne to get to the Olympics, she has to do well at badminton, get on the team shortlist, and then hold her form through the summer to the final trials only 3 weeks before the games start. The chairman of the selectors points out that she is by no means an automatic choice in an event in which Britain is traditionally strong. But as European champion, if she holds her form this year, she stands more than a good chance of getting into the team of 4. By Olympic standards, the princess has reached the top very quickly, and Alison Oliver has few doubts about her ability to stand up to the competition and the strain of the Munich stadiums if she is chosen to go.
On the 8th of September 2022, Charles's life would change forever. At the moment of his mother's death, the Prince of Wales became King Charles III. The extraordinary reign of Queen Elizabeth II ended, and the day he had spent a lifetime preparing for had arrived. A moment he would later say he had dreaded his whole life.
Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Queen Elizabeth II, the longest reigning monarch in British history.
The Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow.
Buckingham Palace announced that the Queen was under medical supervision, and one by one members of the royal family were making their way to Balmoral to see the Queen. Charles and Anne returned to Balmoral to be with their beloved mother as she peacefully passed away. The end of the second significant Elizabethan era and a time of tremendous sadness for the family. Broadcasters announced her death and said the King and Queen would return to London the following day. There is no pause in the continuity of the monarchy, and following his mother's example, Charles stepped into his duties as king.
I think that probably the shock of his mother's very sudden death and him becoming king, when these things happen, you go into slight shock, so you act quite mechanically. It sort of protects you in a way. So I think he wouldn't have been overwhelmed at that moment. He would have been very emotional, but he would have kept it all in check. So I think he dealt with it on a very professional level, which would be really the only way to deal with something of that enormity happening to you.
On Saturday, the 10th of September, the Accession Council gathered at St. James's Palace. It was time to proclaim the new king. For the first time in history, this historic ceremony was filmed. The Privy Council proclaimed His Majesty as King Charles III.
Whereas it has pleased Almighty God to call to His mercy our late Sovereign Lady, Queen Elizabeth II, of blessed and glorious memory, by whose decease the crown of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is solely and rightfully come to the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George.
The late Queen and the King were very close. Her son, she had a wonderful relationship with him. Again, a fun relationship, which we all saw. We used to see different events in London when he would suddenly call her mummy and she'd pull a face at him, and there was a wonderful relationship.
Mummy.
But they respected each other. I mean, he really respected his mother. He respected the fact that she was queen and everything that stood for.
Outside the royal court, the state trumpets sound. Before rolling news, the role of this part of the ceremony was to spread the word to a waiting nation.
The Prince Charles Philip Arthur George is now, by the death of our late sovereign of happy memory, become our only lawful and rightful liege lord, Charles III. God save the King!
Charles made a personal declaration, referencing his mother's reign.
My mother's reign was unequaled in its duration, its dedication, and its devotion. Even as we grieve, we give thanks for this most faithful life.
So the proclamation was quite special because the proclamation has always been, well, part of it is always private. The actual part that you saw outside on the balcony of St. James's Palace has been televised or recorded before. But what goes on indoors, you never see. So the fact we actually got to see him actually doing the signing and everything was quite special. Even if there was one or two little funny moments, but it was quite an important, historical, important moment for him, and for us to all be allowed to watch that, which was, I was amazed that we got to see it, and again, it's one of those memories I think that we'll will always have. You know, it was quite special seeing that.
In the days following his mother's death, Charles visited different nations. In a time where families would ordinarily grieve together in private, Charles made himself very visible, just like his mother did. He met with people waiting in the famous queue to see the Queen lying in state, and visited people across the country who were grieving too. Charles, along with his brothers and sisters, solemnly held a vigil at St. Giles's Cathedral, and later at Westminster Hall, a touching and challenging moment for the siblings. On the 19th of September, Charles played an essential part in the late Queen's funeral. King Charles walked behind the coffin alongside his siblings and sons, a poignant moment.
It must be the most extraordinary experience to walk through the gates of Buckingham Palace as king, something you've done untold times before as Prince of Wales, and to feel this invisible garment of monarchy settling over your shoulders, because you start to think to yourself, well, what am I taking on? What is this responsibility? I mean, what does the future hold for me? So Charles is somebody who knows very keenly that there are these incredibly high standards that he has to live up to, and I suppose when he walked back through Buckingham Palace, he thought, right, here we go.
She made sacrifices for duty. Her dedication and devotion as sovereign never wavered, through times of change and progress, through times of joy and celebration, and through times of sadness and loss. In her life of service, we saw that abiding love of tradition, together with that fearless embrace of progress, which makes us great as nations. The affection, admiration, and respect she inspired became the hallmark of her reign.
Charles has great delivery. I mean, he's practically like a Shakespearean actor. Well, he was a Shakespearean actor at one time. So his delivery of all these speeches is completely brilliant. And I think he writes most of them himself. And he delivers it with superb timing and superb emotion.
And so I think that a lot of people found that much more affecting than they were expecting to, because just as the Queen was a kind of grandmother to the nation, he was very explicitly offering himself as a substitute. And I think that many people who wouldn't expect they were going to be moved by it were moved by it.
Queen Elizabeth was a life well lived, a promise with destiny kept, and she is mourned most deeply in her passing. That promise of lifelong service I renew to you all today.
Arriving at St. George's Chapel, a minor funeral service commenced. The chorus sang, "God Save the King," for the first time. Charles, obviously so moved by the moment, struggled to hold back his tears. He is the sovereign. He is the king. The weight of the crown is now on his shoulders. On May the 6th, the first coronation in 70 years will occur. Though said to be scaled down compared to Queen Elizabeth's ceremony, the pomp and tradition will still feature. Charles and Camilla will be crowned king and queen.
The proclamation of King Charles was something that took place just after his announcement as king, and it's something that was announced in every major city and every major town in Britain. It's something that, because it hadn't happened in so long, it hadn't happened since the 1950s, there was a real interest in it, because people hadn't seen a proclamation before, but of course now they are seeing this man being proclaimed king, which is, again, it's something that's been going on for centuries, but it's still got a hugely symbolic role that we are seeing before our very eyes. The reassertion of monarchy, the reassertion of kingship, because not a lot of people alive today are going to remember King George VI, his grandfather. So having a king again is really quite a novelty.
The role King Charles III played at his mother's funeral was very much head of the family, and also king of the nation. And I'm sure it was quite a difficult time, mainly because, you know, the eyes of the world are watching you. It's not a private thing at all, and he's aware of that. Everything he does, every action, every tear, everything has been watched and listened to and discussed.
Well, Charles was obviously responsible for making sure that the funeral went as smoothly as it did, because he was obviously the focus of attention. He was the person that most people were looking at in terms of how it was going to be for him. And he's somebody who I think was on the day, he walked behind the coffin, he was very much, you know, the focus of public interest, the focus of public attention. And he did everything exceptionally well. I mean, the funeral was very well organised. It had been, of course, organised, it had been planned for years, but it went off without a hitch, and Charles's involvement in that has to be seen as testament to the fact that everything worked well.
There was an extraordinary outpouring of grief amongst the nation, because, you know, the majority of the Queen's subjects had never known another monarch. And it was kind of the end of an era. It wasn't just her death, it was the end of an era. It was end of the Elizabethan age as we know it. And of course it was all so dramatic and so beautifully staged that made it even more poignant. The soldiers, the wonderful music, the people that used to work for the Queen, walking behind her coffin was very, very moving. And the crowd, we know, was crying. Or they were crying, or they were cheering, or they were just silent, completely silent. You could hear a pin drop. I remember when Diana died and the day of her funeral, you could just hear the birds. You couldn't hear anything else. No sound from the crowd. And that is a sort of real high emotion. The first rendition in St. George's Chapel of God Save the King, I think he nearly lost it, because it was so emotional, and the strong voices and the choir and everybody really, really meant God Save the King. And I think that was extraordinary for Charles.
Must have been a very strange experience, because you hear this song, which you've heard a million times before, when it's about your mother and God Save the Queen, and it's about the King and it's about you, and it must have been a very extraordinarily cathartic experience in a lot of regards, but also an overwhelming one.
Following his mother's death, Charles's life and responsibilities have changed. As king, he can no longer speak so freely about his passions and opinions. He instead has to remain unbiased. King Charles has taken on his responsibilities with ease, dealing with the famous red box each day, meeting with prime ministers, presidents, and state officials, and attending various engagements. He has taken his new role in his stride.